Hey quilters, it's Patti Carey of Patti's Patchwork. Welcome to the With Glowing Hearts Quilt-along, celebrating the 10th anniversary of Northcott's Stonehenge O Canada collection. This month we're working on Block 4 and I've got a couple of great tips to share with you. Here's what you need to get started. In addition to our B3, C1, C2, C3, E7 and E9 pieces, we're also going to cut fabrics K and L this time, using just the L1 pieces, as well as the K1 and K2. We're going to start with our first set of corner units, sewing an E7 and a C3 triangle to our K2 units. And we're going to make 2 of each of these units. I've drawn a line with a Hera marker, and like we did with block 1, instead of sewing from the corner, we're going to sew from the midpoint. It makes it so much easier. Sewing one thread width towards the corner, away from that line. Repeat this with the C3 triangles, placing them in the same corner and sewing that same diagonal line. I'm going to finger press those seams towards my K2 units, away from my background. And I'm going to trim that corner off, 1/4 inch from the seam line. We're also going to make a pair of C3 E7 units. This goes in the center of our corner unit. Now it's time, after I press this toward my C3 away from my background, it's time to assemble our corner units with these three segments. I just chain piece them together, and because I've got 2 corner units to make, I'm going to chain piece both of them. I will finger press my seams toward the K2, which is away from that center E7. It'll really make that stripe section pop in our block. Now I can add my 3rd unit to complete these corner units. Align the patches at the top and bottom edges and manage the direction that we've pressed our seams. And the first set of corner units are done. Press those seams toward K2. Now we can build our opposite corner units. Now this time we are sewing one set in one direction, the C2 sets in one direction, and the K2 sets in the opposite direction. So just double check the direction that you're aligning the patches according to the diagrams in step 24 and 25. Again, we sew from the midpoint. Just makes it so much easier, prevents the fabric from getting sucked down into the teeth of our sewing machine. And we'll sew another C3 E7 pair. Finger press our seams away from our background and toward our C2 and K2 units, trimming our corners. Just to reduce the bulk. And look how we've arranged our patches this time. The K2 unit is sewn to the top edge of our E7 C3. And then we can add our C2 unit to the left side once we've finger pressed towards K2. And those corner units are now done. Let's build our long stripe units, sewing an E7 to each of our C1 and K1 long strips. Note the direction in which we are sewing that seam, aligning that square. And once we've got these sewn, we'll finger press our seam towards C and K. Now we can build our center square and a square units. We're going to make one unit that uses all L triangles, and the other 4 units use a combination of E and L. I align this triangle so that the tips extend 3/8 of an inch above and below the edges, top and bottom edges of my B3 square. I'm going to chain piece all 5, triangle down one side and then triangle down the other side of these units. Once that's done, I'm going to finger press the seams in the center LL unit toward the triangles, and the 4 side units, I'm going to finger press my seam towards that center B3 square. This will help the seams nest when we construct the block. Now I will sew the triangles to the remaining 2 sides, this time aligning the patches so that they cross at the 1/4 inch seam line. I like to sew these with the square on top so that it helps me better manage those 2 seams that are already on our center square. And again, I'm going to chain piece these down one side and then flip it around and chain piece those triangles down the other side. And one more to go. And like we did before, we're going to press the LL square and a square unit towards the corners and the EL side square and a square units towards that center square. Now we can construct our corner segments, sewing our corner units to those square and a square units, the side units. I'm going to chain piece both of these, controlling the direction of those seams. I like to nest them initially and then flip it back the direction it needs to go. When I nest it initially, it's to make sure that those seams are correctly aligned. Once I've got these K2 units done, I press the seam towards K2 and I add it to the C1 long unit. I like to sew these with the C1 unit on the bottom. It helps me better manage the multiple seams that I have in this square and a square corner unit. I can control the direction and make sure that they get pressed in the direction that I want them. And I'll chain piece both of them and then press my seam towards C1. Those 2 units are done, and we can construct the opposite corner units now using our K1 and our remaining square and a square and corner units. So I'll chain piece the corner unit to the square and a square, pressing my seam towards C2. And now I can add it to my long K1 piece. Again, sewing with the K1, the long strip on the bottom, so that I can work those seams on the top. And I'll press my seam towards K1. Now we can start building our final block. We've got that center square and a square, and we're going to do a partial seam by sewing the first 2 inches or so of that seam, about to the midpoint of the patch. And I'm going to sew, and then I'm going to curve off the edge with a gentle curve. And it looks just like that. I finger press that seam, that partial seam, toward my C1, and now I can add it to the corner segment because I can sew the whole seam this time. I will again sew with my corner segment on top and the long strip on the bottom so that I can manage the seams. And I'll finger press towards that K1 seam. Now I work counterclockwise around my block, adding the remaining corner segments. Aligning my segments so that they are aligned at the top and bottom edges. And I've got my long seam on the bottom. And I keep finger pressing my seam toward that C1 or K1 unit because that's the part of the block that's really going to pop. Once I've got the final segment added, I can finish sewing my partial seam. I start at the outside edge and I sew along the seam line to past where I curved off the first part of the seam. And I sew about an inch past that, and then I curve off again. Let's zoom in close and take a look. So I'm still on the seam line. You can see where I've curved off. I'm going to stitch about an inch past and then curve off again. This makes a very secure seam, and you don't have those stitches that undo in a typical partial seam. And I finger press my final seam towards that long strip. And here you have block 4. This is one of my favorites. Be sure to pop on over to Northcott's Instagram page and enter the month 4 giveaway for a chance at some terrific prizes. And if you haven't already done so, please also pop onto my website, Pattispatchwork.com, and sign up for the With Glowing Hearts Quilt-along newsletter. Each month I share extra tips and tricks on how you can get your blocks done. There's also a Facebook group, the With Glowing Hearts Quilt-along Facebook group, and you're welcome to join. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you back here next month for Block 5.